I am a certain way, and certain things bring me joy, and I lead with that. I'm unconventional and I don't apologize for it anymore.
Hi, I'm Grasie Mercedes, and welcome back to Not Blank Enough, a podcast about everyday insecurities and triumphs. In this episode, I'm talking with Nicky Endres. The non-binary, transfeminine, genderqueer actor and comic talks about her Midwestern upbringing as an adopted Asian child in a white family, how she dealt with depression and anxiety, and what led her to acting. Plus, today is November 3rd, 2020, Election Day. So today's Afterthought is a special edition where Nicky and I will chat about our feelings towards politics and what we hope for the future of America and its government. I hope you enjoy this very special edition of our show we've titled, Not Conventional Enough. Welcome to Not Blank Enough, Nicky.
Thank you.
It's great having you. Usually I talk about how I know people, and I don't know you that well. We were in class together at BGB Studio. I think maybe we did a scene or two together, maybe had a conversation or two, but I'm excited to learn more about you.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much.
So tell me a little bit about your upbringing, like where you're from and, a little bit about your childhood.
Well, I am an adopted child. I was born in South Korea and I was adopted at 5 months old and grew up in the Midwest in Wisconsin. So I joke that I grew up in a cornfield. It was a suburb of Madison, which is the capital of Wisconsin. So I do exaggerate and make it sound like this rural backwoods sort of Great Plains, Anna Green Gables, Little House on the Prairie sort of thing. And it wasn't totally. Because I have a metropolitan heart, it felt that way. But realistically, it was very suburban. Yeah.
Yeah. And your parents who adopted you, I'm assuming they're white?
Yeah. My parents are white, German and Irish background. So my last name is Endres, which is German. And sometimes people will meet me and they'll try to sort of affect an Asian sort of accent over it.
How do they say that? Oh my God.
Because it's confusing for people who've never,
Right.
Yeah.
An Asian person with a German last name.
Yeah, exactly.
And then did you have any siblings?
I did. I have a younger sister and she is fantastic. I'm always telling her how grateful I am because I'm trans and I was assigned male at birth and raised as a boy. It was because I had a sister that I was, I look back on my childhood and I feel like I had a girlhood, even though I was a boy at the time. Even though I did grow up in a culture that was pretty binary and cishet normative. My parents in particular, in public, there were a lot of warnings that I would have a harder time than other people. But at least at home, there was a certain degree of freedom for creativity and expression and play. And so, my childhood was playing Barbies with my sister and French braiding her hair and making friendship bracelets. And I learned all about curling my eyelashes. And I'm the elder sibling, but I feel like she's my older sister,
Oh, how many years apart are you guys?
Only 2.
Oh, so you're really close. Yeah. And so, tell me more about that. So that's pretty remarkable that your parents were so open to that at such a young age, because it sounds like you were pretty young when you were playing with Barbies and braiding your hair, and they were just cool with it.
I'm not sure they were cool with it. I think that they were probably concerned for my well-being, if not for my mental health, because they do come from a more conservative background. But I give them so much credit because it's I really took for granted growing up, as a teenager and everything, that, my parents were conservative and we lived in the Midwest in a purple state that was leaning very Republican, and there was lots of very Christian and religious people, lots of different types of Christianity. So I don't want to just generalize, but the religious communities were present, and the attitudes, especially regarding sort of sexual orientation and gender identity, were very present. all in a Midwestern nice kind of way, as I say. Like, they're nice to your face, but you know that you're excluded, you know that you're othered, but they're still civil to you about it.
Oh, interesting.
So all things considered, it's like if you're going to be, homophobic, transphobic, and racist at me, at least do it in a nice way. And they did for the most part. So,
Wow. Oh my God. I need you to expand on that. So, like, what was school like for you?
oh, it was terrible. I hated school. I was a really good student, and I think less because I was as smart and gifted as the staff and the adults would tell me I was. I think a lot of that was their way of encouraging me because they knew that I had a really hard time socially. It's funny because even as an adult, I feel like I've only been socialized in my 30s. Like, I'm a loner. I feel like, part of my choice to become a professional actor was, half because I love that art form in particular, but the other half is like, there was no other way to teach me how to like be a human and like relate to other humans. Like,
Yeah.
it's like a side benefit from this career that I, have to kind of understand how a human heart and mind work because I was just found it very hard to relate to people. I think because I was so different and my community was so kind of homogeneous. There just wasn't a lot of opportunities to practice sort of relating to other people in even just topic wise or identity wise in a way that I really could feel seen and free to be myself. But school was really hard. I actually just had a random memory the other day. I've always been very artistic and drawing before I was a performer. My sixth grade teacher, who was really cool, she would invent art projects for me to stay in during recess
Oh,
because I hated recess. Recess was the time where all the bullies could do whatever they wanted unchecked because the supervision was so limited.
yeah.
There's like one staff member outside for 100 kids all running around at the same time. And for me, being cornered and bullied, I think she kind of understood I was different and kind of tried to create a safe space for me.
Oh, that that breaks my heart, but then it also makes me so appreciative for teachers like that who are observant and actually care about the kids and go out of their way to help, kids who might need that extra help. But at the same time, like this comes up so many times in these interviews. It's like kids are so mean. We're so mean to each other when we're children. It really makes me sad. I'm like, I think I'm getting my period because I'm very emotional today. and I'm like, just the thought of that is like bringing tears to my eyes. I'm like, oh my God, just a freaking schoolyard full of kids just being mean to each other. But I'm glad you had that teacher as like a little bit of a saving grace. Yeah, tell me more about the school. So was it mostly white kids? Were there even other Asian kids you can relate to or not at all?
No, it was very much white. I mean, there were a handful of black kids, and the maybe the handful of other Asian kids were also like adoptees with white parents.
Oh, wow.
We also didn't. At least I didn't feel an instant kinship with that as an experience because we were so kind of, for lack of a better term, whitewashed. Like, I grew up thinking I was white. And so I would be surprised when people were racist at me or treated me differently or talked about my face or my eyes or my skin. And
Yeah.
it's such a weird intersectional experience thinking back because I'm like, I'm kind of grateful for it because being raised a straight white male, like, even though I'm a non-binary, trans feminine, Asian queer person, I have this nonsensical inner confidence that I deserve great things and things are going to be okay at the end of the day, despite the way that people have treated me and the lack of opportunities I had. But yeah, it was mostly white kids, and the climate of this year and social justice, well, the latest iteration of it, I should say, really, and just sort of a combination of factors and like being online and people from back home contacting me or me finding myself in discussion with them. I'm really reminded of how kind of lowercase t traumatizing it was growing up because it's like I'm fortunate I didn't experience so many like overt bodily harm kinds of things, but the microaggressions, man, 18 years every day over
Yeah,
time
that'll,
add up.
yeah.
And it's so subtly you don't realize it until you escape from it. And there's all this baggage and cynicism and hurt and walls and then I just hear some of the people that I grew up with on social media or whatever, and I'm like, wow, I can't believe that they're that blind. And I'm like, oh wait, no, but yeah, I can, because I grew up with them.
Right. Isn't it funny how when you're in it, you can feel it and maybe even see it, but I don't think you realize the enormity of it until you get older and you reflect back. I'm having a similar awakening of sorts, like thinking back. And I grew up in New York City. I mean, people think like, oh, you grew up in New York. Like, that's like the most liberal, blah, 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 most diverse, most multicultural. And still, like, the microaggressions and the things that existed and the things I heard and the things I was called. And always just assuming that's just kind of the way things are. And then realizing how that affected, like, how I felt about my hair, how I felt about my skin color, how I felt about my nose, like things that you later on look back and go, oh, yeah, that's because I was being told this. I was being told I'm not pretty because of this. And I'm not all-American because of this. I'm not Black enough because of this. I'm not Latin enough because of this. So it's like, when you're living it, you're like, okay, yeah, sure. Everyone goes through some stuff and some bullying. But then later on, you really look back and go like, oh, wow, yeah, that's a lot of shit I dealt with for my entire life or my entire childhood.
And especially when you're a child, right?
Yeah, you have enough insecurity.
Like, if you don't have the mental and emotional development or fortitude, you internalize that shit in ways that are like you don't even know until like you're an adult and you're like, oh wow, I can't believe I have this this problem.
Oh God. At this young age and living in this environment where you're feeling, yeah, like you don't quite fit in, I would assume. What was that blank for you, that not blank enough back then? What was the strongest one, at least?
Oh, given that context, I wasn't normal enough. I wasn't straight enough. I wasn't a boy enough. Like, I was a queer child. It's like, if I was a kid in this day and age, I'd be a fucking Netflix star kid. You know what I mean? Like, so interesting and colorful and artistic and unbridled and just sort of.
Yeah.
And again, thank goodness, like, my mom was a kindergarten teacher, so she had a lot of experience in early childhood and just really didn't want to snuff any of my flames. Figuratively and, literally speaking.
Right.
Oh, that's a good one, Nikki. Remember that one. Again, and it's only like as an adult that I can really feel thankful for this because I took it for granted as a kid. I guess what's perplexing to me is that, honestly, I never felt like anyone actually wanted to keep me down. Again, this is me being generous, but there was an element of admiration in there. Like, this kid is weird and this kid is different. Oh, let's not destroy this kid. But it was also like, kid, you're going to get yourself hate crimed if you don't, like, tone it down. But they couldn't tell me that. They could just sort of hint,
Yeah, so it was almost out of your benefit, or at least in their heads and in their minds, to kind of dim your light, let's say, in kind way.
Yeah. I mean, at least with my parents and the, like, staff and people at school that I remember that were very gentle and kind of roundabout about. I mean, there were definitely people who were straight up, chink, faggot, tranny, freak, like, kill yourself. Like, there were many of those.
Jeez.
But they were mostly peers, like people my age. I didn't get a whole lot from adults. All the stuff from adults were microaggressions because it was like, there was still the attitude that racism is bad. Like, nobody wanted to admit that.
And then what was your high school experience like?
High school is where I kind of became empowered. I talk about this in my comedy special I wrote. I was depressed and suicidal like most. Oh, this is so sad, Nikki. Can't believe you just said that.
No, but you're being honest.
It's an unfortunate and very serious statistic.
Yeah.
That, queer youth are just so much more likely to suffer from mental health issues with depression and anxiety and suicidal thoughts, or even actually following through. And I was a statistic in that sense. At a certain point, I think I hit a rock bottom. And after that, I kind of just thought, oh, I've got nothing to lose. Like, they really want me to kill myself, and that didn't work. So why don't I just spend what energy I can making their lives horrible? And what could be more horrible than being better than them? So, like, I campaigned to be prom king and became the most
love
popular
it.
kid in school.
Oh my God.
And yeah, and it was so Machiavellian, because like I would love to say, oh, I did it, for all of the underrepresented kids and all the kids that felt invisible and were made fun of, and I wanted to be a leader. No, it was me being vengeful and full of pain, and I wasn't going to bully the bullies back with their own methodologies. I was going to surpass them by making everyone love me. So I would just tell people what they wanted to hear. I would pretend that I liked people or was friends with people. It was very political and disingenuous. It was all about me. But a side effect is that I did start to learn about compassion and caring. I wish I could say that I had the emotional maturity at the time to actually know that that's what was happening and to kind of lean into that. Because I think that if I had been more genuine, I would have healed faster. But I didn't really have any role models or anything to kind of champion that as a way to get through it.
Did you become prom king?
Yeah, I won actually, and now it's been so long because like we filmed.
That's amazing though. That's like a I mean, I hope you're writing this movie, because this is just I'm like, I love it. I love it. Tell me more.
There was a tie for prom queen. And so I say in my special, there's a joke, there were 3 prom queens that year. And I won by a landslide. And then my senior year is when I kind of rose to the occasion of more of a cultural leadership role. I started a gay-straight alliance with a friend and just kind of involved myself in as many extracurriculars as possible. Also just because, I wanted a scholarship for university. And so, being involved is how you do that.
Yeah, exactly.
I went to this like leadership camp. I was nominated by staff. And it was one of those things that's like, I did this selfishly for me out of pain. But all of these positive things seemed to be happening from it. That was kind of the beginning of my healing as well. Being out and proud in myself inspired people, and I became sort of an advocate by example, even though I hadn't intended to be. But ever since, it's kind of been my way. Or I don't feel called to activism in sort of maybe the social media way that we're most familiar with. But I do consider myself an advocate in the way that I try to live and put things out there congruent to my belief. That's where it kind of all began, by accident.
Yeah. And so in high school, it sounds like you definitely had an overall better experience. So you came out in high school then?
Yeah, and it was one of those things that I didn't so much come out as kind of just stop trying to hide. Because again, it was obvious since I was 4. Like, this kid is queer.
Right.
Like, we don't even, like, they didn't even have labels for what I was. Like, I didn't even have labels for what I was till I was like 30. But
Love it. And so then at what point did you realize that you were trans? Was that later or also in high school?
yeah, well, it's one of those things, right? It's like, for me at least, like words provide meaning, and meanings are symbols for ideas, right? That I was always trans, but I didn't know it until I was 30. And I came out as trans. And then after that, even realized that, well, right now I identify as non-binary trans and transfeminine. Because I was assigned male at birth, and I'm definitely not a male or a man. But also, I've never felt unequivocally female. I feel, on the feminine half of the binary, but still sort of a mix of everything. And I walk through the world as a woman, as a non-binary queer woman, I would say. So it's one of those things where it's all like, I always knew how I was, but I didn't know how to express it to other people. And I mean, this is still an ongoing journey as we, queer anthropologists collaborate and help us, sort of make room in the spectrum for every kind of variant that exists because it's so diverse.
Right. And a lot of these words didn't exist when you were younger.
Yeah, like I even have a joke in my set about how like I grew up in a cornfield and we didn't get any reception for intersectional feminism. It didn't mean it didn't exist. It's just we didn't know about it. So
Right. No, that makes total sense. I mean, yeah, I totally get it. And people are still learning.
learning about it just changed my entire outlook for everything. And I'm like, oh, and that's me.
That totally makes sense. It's hard to identify something if you don't have the word for it.
And you can kind of have an internal sense of it, but the confirmation that there's a thing and that you're not the only one, it makes the difference between, like I'm self-confident enough and I think and I am who I am and I don't hate myself despite the world telling me I should, into I know who I am, I'm proud of who I am, and I'm going to find community with other people like me. It's for me, that was kind of the difference.
Yeah. Did you go to college?
I did.
And where did you go and what was that like?
I went to a liberal arts university called Lawrence in Appleton, Wisconsin. That's some of my fondest memories and just sort of developmental years. I think maybe for a lot of people, the, late teens, early 20s, those college years are very influential regardless. For me, it was kind of the cure for what I needed growing up in a small town. Again, I was just surrounded by not liberalism in the political sense, but liberalism of thought. And why I am a big advocate for liberal education for everybody is because it teaches you how to think. It teaches you how to use your brain.
Yeah.
Like you study subjects, you major in a thing, but it's all technicality. It's all marketing and resume work because at the end of the day, you're really studying life. You're studying wisdom. You're learning the same thing as an English major as the chemistry major is learning. You're contextualizing it in different ways based on what you're focusing on and what's kind of important to your, area of industry. But at the end of the day, like we all had to read Eastern philosophy. We all had to learn scientific revolutions. We all had to learn Plato and philosophy. And because of that, there was also a sort of discourse we could have across disciplines and just sort of seek both contextual and kind of critical analysis just across the board. So even like now, like I am maybe not an expert in anything. I mean, I'm probably the best at, acting because, that's my industry. But
Right.
I feel like even though I know next to nothing about healthcare and medicine, I can have intelligent conversations with those who do know more about it than I do. It's so empowering to feel confident in being able to use your brain. And so at least that's my experience. And I just wish and hope that, a liberal education approach will someday be accessible to everybody.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because I do feel like I went to school eventually for journalism, but my first 2 years was just liberal arts. And I do feel like I learned the most in those first 2 years than anything else because it is the time to learn all the things and to read about all sorts of things that you think you might not be interested in and then find out that you are, or that opens up your world to something else that you might be interested in.
Yeah. And like, who would have thought that my reading an ancient Chinese philosophy book was going to inform my Shakespeare studies? Or, like, who knew? Who knew?
When did you decide you wanted to be an actor?
I think when I was considering dropping out of university, actually. I was once upon a time just very impulsive. And it came from a lot of privilege, just being raised as a cis, heteronormative, white male. Even though that wasn't me, I was raised as it. So I internalized the privilege of it all. And, I feel thankful for it. The world is unfair and terrible, but I wish that everybody could have the privilege equally because I mean, just the blind faith that everything's going to be okay and you're deserving is just that kind of worthiness is priceless. But part of that privilege was just thinking, I could do whatever I want and I'll be okay. Like, I worked so hard to get this scholarship, and my dad helped me get a loan, and we'll just throw it all away. Like,
right, of course.
Thankless. I did stick it through and I graduated. Oh, you know what? It's like I had forgotten about this until now. I had my first true love relationship. And we broke up, and it was
in college.
Yes, and in college. We're still in college. I was about 22.
Okay.
21, 22, I don't know. And that fell apart in smoldering flames. And, it's at those low points where I feel like, Phoenix from the ashes, we also are open to a lot of things that we might have been resistant to. So again, I was kind of like, what's the use? What's the meaning? What's the point? I have nothing to lose. And so I said, I'm going to Hollywood. I'm going to be an actor.
Oh my God, just like that.
Just like that. That's just me. Like every single tattoo I've had, like I've meditated about, I've thought, what's meaningful to me? And then I wake up one morning, I'm just like, I'm getting a tattoo today. Like I might meditate on themes and concepts for a long time and feel things. But when it comes to decision making, like I just decide and I follow through. For better or for worse, I've always been that way.
So you had a relationship in college. This goes down in flames, as you said. So then you graduate college and you decide, I'm moving to LA to be an actor.
Yeah, even before I graduated, I decided. So my senior year in college was passing. Like I went from being, I must get straight A's in everything and be a great student and maintain my scholarship to, okay, I need a B- average to keep my scholarship. B- average it is, because I'm going to Hollywood. Except, of course, in my acting class. So like my senior project, we did Christopher Durang's Laughing Wild, and I really leaned heavily into that sort of monologue-heavy comedy and found a lot of joy collaborating with my friends who are all like geniuses. Like I have to say, I mean, like humble brag, my school was very good, like prestigious and shit. And not to brag about the school itself, but the people that I got to work with. I mean, I got in because I had good grades and I was considered gifted and talented. But once I arrived, I was like, oh no, Nikki, you're a very charming con artist, because these are real geniuses. And, like you're funny.
So basically, it sounds like imposter syndrome, which we all suffer from at times. So did you go to school for acting, though? Like, what was your major?
I entered in psychology. I wanted to be a criminologist and study pathology and how people end up doing terrible things. And I think a lot of that came from my entire childhood being bullied. I'm just like, so why? Why is this so pervasive? Is there anything we can do to cure it or get ahead of it? Are there programs we can offer if, we can't control people's home life? And maybe some of it's religious, maybe some of it's cultural. Is there anything, like I was just so interested in how people can be terrible to each other and be okay with it.
Wow.
And I'm still fascinated by that. But then I figured out, psychology is a science. And there's like statistics and tests and all these things and papers. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do the hard science. I just want to do the pontificating and the interviewing.
Right.
So then I'm like, no, I just want to play one on TV. I want to be like Mulder and Scully on the X-Files.
There you go.
I think I tripped on like LSD or something, or shrooms, or I don't know. I did a lot of drugs in college too. But all responsibly, all very like spiritually, I would say.
You don't have to defend yourself about your drug intake. I love it.
I really think entheogens are beautiful and can have a lot of therapeutic and healing. At least in my experience, I've always been that way. But I think I had a wild trip. And then the next day I just decided I'm going to be an English major instead. I'm going to double major in English and theater, and I'm going to focus on Shakespeare.
Oh, wow.
And like, ask me if I ever finished a Shakespeare play. It's like, no, Nikki, like, but film and television is actually what I love most.
So you came out to LA after college, I'm assuming?
Yes.
And then what was your experience like here? How did it all go down?
Very lucky. Well, it could have been luckier, but I choose to be grateful about it. Yeah, I found flatmates on Craigslist before I moved here. My dad, who is even more like Midwestern, conventional job pragmatic, and he's like, well, wouldn't you want to visit LA first? I'm like, no, I've already decided. He's like, oh, okay. You met your flatmates online, is it? And I'm like, yep, they're gay, they'll be cool. And I lucked out. I got a place in Hollywood with some really great guys, and they introduced me to Hollywood, West Hollywood, and just sort of helped me become an Angelina right away.
Did you get an agent right away? Did you start working? Like, how did it go?
I got a manager right away because I took a class and her husband was a casting director, and they kind of would refer people. And I was young and new and Asian, and my manager had contacts with Nickelodeon, so a lot of my early kind of under 5 credits or Nickelodeon shows.
Oh.
So she really helped me out. And actually, the casting director, he was casting a short film, and I was a reader. I just volunteered to help. And so I didn't know that a reader wasn't supposed to steal the scene because I was brand new. This is like the beauty of ignorance, right? When you don't know how you're supposed to act, you kind of just do until you're told not to. So I was reading as a reader with all of these, guys. And the writer, director, producer team of brothers, they ended up asking the casting director, like, we saw everybody and we want your reader instead. And
that's amazing.
So I booked my very first thing, kind of stealing the show. And that is also significant because it started a trend, especially in my early career, when indie stuff, this was like in that age where independent film was just more popular and a lot more people were doing it. And, digital was new. So it was like newly kind of affordable for people to do indie stuff. And it was these two Black brothers. The short was called Fuck You, Pay Me. And it was kind of a sci-fi parody about like student debt and how unreasonable it is that we ask people in order to be successful, we put all of these financial barriers in front of that. So it, kind of handled intersectional inequality. Broadly speaking, it was a production of and for people of color. And I felt so honored to be included because I had grown up white and always othered despite that. And it was just a confusing kind of thing. So to come into a big city where there are people of color and for Black filmmakers to invite me to be a part of their project, like right away, it felt like home. And I felt so grateful.
Yeah.
And then my first feature, also an indie, writer, director, producer, was Black, and some of the stars were Black, and I was also included as a lead. And these were my first 2 leading roles, and I was so spoiled by those experiences, thinking, oh, I'll be a little indie darling. I'll be like Chloe Sevigny. But those were the only 2 that happened. But it's like the fact that I was a lead role, I was a not totally out, but not closeted, queer Asian, working with Black filmmakers who are making it happen for themselves. That just gave me this flavor of Hollywood that I loved and that I still love. And then I was woken up to sort of the harsher reality that, but if you want to do network work, Nikki, like just, be in the background and smile and pretend that you're Japanese. Like,
yeah, let's get into that. So as an actor, filmmaker, a lot of my guests have been in entertainment. And when they are guests of color, which they usually are, we get into, what happens in Hollywood. And, things are slowly changing, surely, but there's been a big history of stereotyping and the way casting goes and even the opportunities we get, the things we're told. What are some stories that you can tell us that kind of slapped you in the face about Hollywood?
Oh, gosh.
That's what it sounds like, where this is going towards.
So many. Up until recently in Hollywood, like my white friends are like, oh, I have this audition. I'm just like, I had one this month and I'm so happy. Like, like recently, and thank goodness, I'm not complaining, but like I think I've had more just in 2020 during the pandemic of all times than like the last 15 years of my career.
Isn't that crazy?
One that comes to mind actually, and this was more like a big city thing than even just a Hollywood thing. I auditioned for, I think it was a commercial or a modeling thing. I don't know what it was, but it was like an Asian casting person. And think she was also Korean. And there's a whole Korean population in LA. And, me coming from white people land, I do not identify as Korean American. I'm Asian American for sure, but I think Korean American is so specific in terms of its cultural influences and background that I know it's not my background.
You didn't grow up with that, right?
This Asian casting director made sort of a snide comment about when she said something to me in Korean, asked if and I said, oh no, I only, English is the only language I speak, and un peu de français. She said something about, like self-loathing much, and I'm like, whoa, okay, I didn't even think about how the point of view of not knowing a Korean language, being ethnically a Korean person, could be considered self-loathing or a rejection. And I'm like, well, she might be coming from an immigration standpoint or an assimilation pressure standpoint, where it's, the dominant white culture is asking you to give up your Korean identity. I was raised white. I'm part of the problem. Like...
Well, I mean, she doesn't know your background, I'm assuming. She doesn't know that you were adopted and raised by white people in a Midwestern town and you were surrounded by white people. So I totally get it. It's a rude comment, regardless, even if you were raised with Korean parents.
Well, and in that situation, right, it's like a professional context.
Right.
Or they ask me, I've been asked if I can do accents, because with Asian people in particular, there's a xenophobic assumption that English isn't our first language. And so, like, I actually studied with a Japanese friend who, like, I was teaching her how to get rid of her Tokyo dialect and work on her standard American. And she was teaching me how to do sort of a standard Tokyo dialect that Americans can still understand. And so there was this whole exchange. But, like, my heart in dialects has always been in, like, the UK dialects. So I always wanted to be, like, I have this dream that I want to be an American who's known for playing an English character very well. Like, I'm very, like, modern in London, because I'm not great at, like, all the time period things like RP and all that, but it's, like, more modern.
I love it. You should listen to my interview with Oliver Stark. He's British, and wow, what an accent.
Oh, gosh.
So with that, was there ever a feeling of not feeling like Asian enough or not feeling Korean enough when people are basically telling you, like, hey, you should speak this or you should be this way because of your ethnicity versus how you actually were brought up?
Oh, yeah. Even, like, in the breakdowns, they'd be like, looking Chinese, Japanese, Korean, whatever. It was one kind of specific Asian nationality, ethnicity, and language. And they would say, must speak, blah, blah, blah. Or, early in my career, I interviewed with, like, a boutique agency. My manager got me an interview, and he was really excited about my look. But he's like, do you speak Mandarin? And I'm like, well, first of all, I'm a Korean person raised by white people, and no. And he's like, oh, well, then I can't do anything for you. And I'm like, seriously? Seriously? The only Asian people that you can represent are Asian people who speak Mandarin? Like, wow. So even just the vision, the fact that that was a vision for an agent who makes their money on clients who can book, like, that his point of view of the landscape of the sort of economy of Asians in casting was Mandarin at that time.
That's so interesting. I didn't know. I mean, as a Latinx person, I've definitely had a similar situation where, well, one, I don't get cast as that because they have such a narrow view of what a Latinx person should look like in Hollywood. And that's slowly changing, I think, and as more and more people become aware of Afro-Latinx. But the few times where I've had auditions for a Latin character, they almost always want you to speak Spanish. And my Spanish is just okay. Like, definitely not enough to... It's well enough that, like, if I had a scene or a couple of lines in Spanish, I can knock it out. But if it's, like, a character who only speaks in Spanish, I just wouldn't be comfortable with that.
Yeah.
And every time that comes up, there's that tinge of feeling like not Latin enough because this is what they expect of you. And while I was raised by my Dominican mom, I had a white stepfather my whole life. And also my mom was taught or told not to teach me Spanish because at the time when I was younger, There is very much that thing where Americanize your children so that they can go farther. Like don't make them speak the language so they don't have an accent and blah 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 blah, which I'm sure is very similar in the Asian community with that same immigrant experience. But
Yeah.
to be to be Korean and then expect you to speak Mandarin is even more crazy than the whole Spanish thing. Like that's just insane.
Right? It's like we're interchangeable.
Yeah.
And that's such an interesting issue too, right? And I'm very much in sort of like the 50-50 by 2020 initiative sort of attitude where it's like, look, if everything is fair and it's kind of a 50-50 proportion, then fine. Cis people play trans people. If trans people are playing cis people, then hey, then it's fair.
Right.
But until that's 50-50, no. We got to be playing ourselves. Similarly, it's like, look, until we have enough Asian American, internationally Asian representation in mainstream media, then it's like, look, I'm Korean, but I do a really great audition for a character who happens to be Japanese American. Like, I still think that's okay, right?
Yeah.
If I'm playing a geisha in a kimono, please try to find an actual Japanese person to do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's tricky, and we talk about this in my episode. I think it's episode 7, Not Latinx Enough, and I was talking to 2 Latinx actors, one Cuban, one Puerto Rican, but the Puerto Rican one always gets cast as Mexican because in Hollywood's eyes, he looks Mexican. And so part of me is like, yeah, we should all be able to play each other within our community. And then part of me is like, no, fuck that. Like, just make him Puerto Rican. Just make you Korean. Like, I don't understand. Like, I don't know. I think it can go either way, and it's tricky and it's complicated. And honestly, if you're a person of color working in this business, you just want to get work and you just want to have opportunities to work.
Yeah.
So if I have to play, mixed, Black, Hispanic, whatever I have to play, just let me play it. So I get both arguments to it, I guess.
Yeah, because it's so contextual to the story that's being told too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like if we're talking about, The Terror Season 2, which is about Japanese internment camps, let's please have authentic, genuine
Japanese people, yeah.
Because that is historical. You know what I mean? And that's and the authenticity is relevant and important in the meta sense and also just to the storyline itself, right? If we're doing a high school like comedy and there's all these kids and all of us, even if we were from immigrant families, would be like 4th or 5th generation. We're all American. Like, please get the Indian kid, get the, the Southeast Asian kid, like mix us all up. Just change their name from Smith to Patel. Like, who the fuck cares? Like,
right.
Maybe they have a Black mom. It's 2020, y'all.
It's 2020, y'all. I want to talk about One Day at a Time. Tell me about how that happened and where we are with it.
One Day at a Time is so significant, I think, because it's a brilliant reboot of a Norman Lear classic centering on a Cuban-American family in LA. And actually, some of the stars are Puerto Rican, but
Of course.
one of the showrunners, Gloria, she's Cuban, and a lot of the storylines and characters and cultural knowledge comes from her.
Yeah, it's a great show. I've watched it. It's really great.
I'm so grateful to it. I was already a fan of it just because it's so progressive and intersectional and diverse without being preachy. It's kind of just a slice of life, and it's so feminist. I love it. They set it up with 3 generations of women in a family, and each one of them have generational points of view in addition to whatever other like political points of view. And the way that they're able to sort of harmonize and give voice to everyone and not take a side, right? Show everyone's humanity is just so deft and heartfelt and genuine, and you can recognize your own family. Personally, I'm also just thankful for it as a job, because I came out in 2012 as trans. And again, when I say come out, it was more like I changed all my marketing materials. I changed my SAG name. I told my agent to, stop submitting me for boy roles. And even though I'm comfortable playing all genders, and I still love playing all genders, it's just, like I'm not going to be playing a cis man. Please give me a queer, maybe queer masculine or non-binary character I'm fine with. But back to One Day at a Time, it was the first gig that I booked. I had like no auditions for like 5 years, and Laverne Cox had just been on Time. That's one of the big kind of landmark things that made me think that there's room for me now and I can, just be myself. But there was a period of adjustment that was like a dead zone. Every other year though, I think, oh, I should just give up because, I'm an artist and that's part of my process. So, so I booked that and I felt so spoiled right away because we started on Netflix. So in Netflix and Sony and everybody, they know what they're doing is important, even though, it's still delivering storytelling for entertainment. There's an understanding that there's a responsibility and an honor in telling these stories in the way that they are. And I feel so spoiled because it felt like entering a family. I'm just so grateful. It's just pure joy. It sparks joy.
And for anyone who hasn't seen it, who do you play on the show?
I play Cynthia, one of the veterans in Penelope, Justina Machado's character, her support group. We are all veterans and we're all women. The show deals with anxiety and depression and post-traumatic stress. It very deftly handles mental health and sexuality and relationships and religion. It's very progressive and also very wholesome. There's no proselytizing. There's people with opinions, and they always manage to find the love. And so my character is kind of irreverent and funny. She's a little bit of a space cadet sometimes. And it's great because one of the hallmarks, I think, is that the writers and producers really want to marry as much of like whatever an actor's natural sort of personality is that they bring to a character into what the script is. And I mean, it's a small character, but I feel important. That just makes me speechless to be, a quote unquote smaller role in a show, but still feel important. I mean, that's very special.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
And it's all because of the people I work with. It's just the people that make that show. It's a huge family. I feel part of the family. I'm so thankful. And now they're on CBS, 7 total, but the 6 episodes that they'll be showing on CBS are all this current season. And then they will also be airing all the reruns, season 1 through 3, so people can catch up. So tune in.
Nicky, this has been amazing. Before we go, I just want to talk to you about what you think we should name this episode, because we name every episode. And I want to know what you think your overarching blank is. And keep in mind, sometimes that blank is actually your superpower. It's what makes you, pursue what you pursue, or what makes you feel maybe that was the thing that made you kind of break out of your shell, or wherever the case may be.
Oh, this got so deep for me, right? Because I came in here knowing that that's the premise, thinking, oh, well, I'll talk about how I haven't felt trans enough. And then we didn't even talk about that, and not complaining. This has been amazing. But I guess given what we have covered, I would say I'm not conventional enough. I never have been, and somewhere along my late 20s, I embraced it. And it's not about being a hipster or a pseudo-nonconformist or an iconoclast just for the sake of breaking down normative culture. I am a certain way, and certain things bring me joy, and I lead with that. I have enough privilege to have been able to have those opportunities, so I do want to acknowledge this is not like advice. Everybody just follow your joy. But I'm unconventional, and I don't apologize for it anymore.
Oh.
And if anything, it's brought me some of the greatest, deepest, purest joys that I've been able to experience. And yeah.
I love that. I love not conventional enough, because from the little I knew of you before this, and from learning way more about you on this interview or during this interview, that makes complete sense to me. And maybe you don't feel trans enough. I'm not sure. We really didn't talk about that. But to me, it's so beyond your transness, especially because you identify as, I'm going to see if I get this right, non-binary, trans, feminine. Queer are also part of that?
Yeah, all of it.
Did I get it right? all the things.
Yes,
all the things. Yes, and it's like, as a straight person who doesn't who's still trying to figure out all the letters and what everything stands for and the spectrum of gender and sexuality, it's like, Yeah, like even in your queerness, it's unconventional. Like it's not just I'm gay or I'm trans. You're like all these things. And I love that. Like that to me is special, and that to me makes you more like almost appealing or diverse. Like it's almost like you're like I am everything. I am women, hear me roar. But like there's something about that to me that seems really special because I think, like I said, as a straight person, sometimes I have to be, I feel like in these conversations, I'm like, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't want to label someone the wrong way. And I think we're all learning. And I think as things evolve, because like you said, letters are being added and things are we're trying to be more inclusive.
Yeah.
It's like we're all learning. And if you're willing to embrace that and just be open and not be like defensive about it, like I'm willing to say like, yeah, I don't know everything about it. Just like not everyone knows everything about who I am and my experience.
Gosh, there are people in the queer community who don't know everything. I mean, like, there are queer people who police other queer people. And a lot of times that's part of their own kind of journey and coming into themselves. Like, I went through this whole super, like, pretty girl, mean girl period where, like, I was judging everybody's commercially physical beauty. Like, it's not me at all. That has never been me. But, like, in order for me to sort of accept myself as woman, I needed to mentally pick apart. Like, it's so unfeminist of me. Like, it's not who I am at my core, but I recognize it was a process I had to go through in order to understand where my womanness is. And actually, now that I've come through it, I'm a stronger feminist for it because I kind of like I allowed myself to go into all those deep, dark, shitty, judgy, patriarchal places because I knew I didn't hold them to be true, but it was an uncomfortable process that I felt really a lot of shame about.
Right.
But it's a thing.
I have to admit that I'm not even sure which episode I talked about this. Maybe it was with Liz about feeling not girly enough. Like I can feel not feminine enough and not girly enough. And I remember because you would always come into acting class. You're always so like done. Like I love it. Like you always have like your makeup and your hair is gorgeous and you would like wear these little heels and I would just be like, oh my God. Like it make me feel less feminine seeing you be so feminine. I'm just like, I can't. I'm like, what am I doing? I'm just like a boy. Like I was just like a boy. And that is such like societal shit that's ingrained in me that I should look a certain way to feel girly and then see you and like admire that you can do it. And I'm like, why the fuck can I put in the effort? Like, what is wrong with me? And so I totally get it. Like, I totally get where we're like ingrained to think like you have to look a certain way to be considered feminine.
Oh, and that's so present for me as a trans person, right? Because I wake up in a biologically male body and I love my biologically male body. I just want to be a woman with a biologically male body. And so like, even on my journey, like a lot of it, sometimes it would start off with me it was like drag. It was like a performance. It was to adhere to other people's expectations to make it easier, quite frankly, for myself to move through the world. But then somewhere, and became very apparent during the pandemic. Well, we were still in the pandemic, but something that I really confirmed for myself was I love makeup. I love it for me. I don't do it to look commercially beautiful. I don't do it to look a certain way for other people. It brings me joy. And guess what? Not every day do I feel like I need it or want it.
Right.
Or sometimes I feel joyful without it. And I always feel, this is so funny, style-wise, like I just like feeling like an old retired odalisque. I'm this old granny, former whore who's like now in charge of the entire boudoir, like whatever. I'm very sex positive, so I say all of this sex worker thing with love and positivity, and I wish sex work was legal. I wish that we could champion it, especially for women, but for everyone as an outlet for education and sexual health. So I say that for you listeners who don't already know me with incredible positivity and hope. But yeah, I feel like an old granny who's like a librarian, but was like a sexy librarian. And like I always just want to walk around with like kimonos and caftans and kitten heels.
I love it.
Like I imagine myself, that's what I'll be when I'm 80. And why wait until I'm 80? Like,
I love it. I love it so much. So wait, real quick, you said, do you not feel trans enough though?
Yeah, a lot of times it's funny because it's like when I'm in the company, mixed company or, cis company, no, I'm like, whatever, I'm the trans one. But among other trans people, especially trans women, I'm like, oh, they have all of this sisterhood thing that I don't necessarily feel invited to because I'm not medically transitioning. And it's not true that all we talk about when we get together is our tits and our hormones and, our gender confirmation surgeries. It's not at all what it is. But in some support group or safe space situations or contexts, a lot of that comes up because it's the hardship that we're all going through. And it's kind of the only safe place that you really can share openly and have 14 other women like get you and share all of their versions of that. So it's beautiful. But also sometimes I feel like I'm completely left out of that.
Yeah.
And some of that's on me. It's not that I'm intentionally being excluded. It's kind of a parallel, like when I'm with a bunch of my Black women friends, and I'm just like, we all know what it's like to be in a society with white supremacy, but I do not know the experience of being a Black woman in America. They know that I have incredible empathy and sort of a parallel Asian person experience, but like we have that unspoken understanding that it's like I'm woke enough to know, like, not the same, but like we're also sort of in a similar support group circumstance where there's understanding and compassion there that's special.
Yeah, and it sounds like, I think what a lot of communities and labels, whether that's trans or Latinx or Black or whatever the case may be, there's a thought that it's all like a monolithic experience. And it's like, it's not. Like, just because you're in this group doesn't mean your experience is the same. And therefore, you being trans doesn't mean you're going to feel like every other trans woman or have the same experience as every other trans woman. Like, obviously, we all have different experiences and ways we view the world and different ways the world views us.
Yeah.
And so to me, that makes complete sense that you might at times not feel trans enough or feel like left out in that environment.
And so much of that's on me. It's an internalized thing because that's just me kind of thinking, oh, well, what is it to be trans then? I guess it's just sort of feeling left out of a community I feel I should be a part of. But again, it's like my insecurity.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Nikki. This has been fantastic.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I've had so much fun with you.
Of course. Hey guys, so like I mentioned in the intro, today is a special Election Day edition of My Afterthought that I recorded with my guest, Nikki. I hope you enjoy it, and happy Election Day. So this episode, though we're recording on October 1st, will be airing or going live on Election Day.
Dun, 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 dun. So important. I feel honored.
So, people listening, if people are listening that day to maybe ease their nerves while we wait for results, I'm actually not going to have any more interviews until after the election because I feel like it's such an important one that it's definitely going to affect conversation.
Oh, yeah.
Whichever way it goes.
Oh, gosh. No pressure, Nikki. This is a time capsule, Gracie. This is a time capsule. Like...
It really is. It really is. It's like, what are our thoughts today, and what do we hope for? What? I mean, I think we both know what we hope for, but it's just like I don't even want to think about what will happen if it doesn't go how we want it to go.
And I hate to be cynical, but even if the election goes the way that I want it to, and I'm voting for Biden and Harris, I hope that they win. They need to win, from my point of view. Mm-hmm. Even when that happens.
Even when they win.
It still may not be a smooth transition, and there may be a lot of drama and stuff just because, Trump is the way he is.
Mm-hmm. We're not dealing with a normal candidate here.
I tried to watch the debate, and I had to turn it off, and I had to wait and read the news, like all the pundits' opinions about it, because it was just so painful.
Yeah.
Trump reminds me of every bully I've ever met and who's ever bullied me. And, the bigger parts of me just wants to say, well, he's a sad, insecure person. But, even like just trying to psychoanalyze him, like that does no good. He is who he is, and we have to deal with him. What I want most for America is to heal and come together and mature, actually, if I'm being quite honest. I think that we need to grow in our emotional intelligence and our emotional maturity. That feeds into both social justice and political discourse and the way that we work with one another and treat each other on social media. I definitely believe in freedom of speech. I'm not saying that people should ever be censored, but as a matter of personal dignity for oneself, not even the way we treat other people, to just give a little bit more conscientiousness to the types of things we're putting out in the world and being the change we want to see in the world. And you're allowed to disagree with me. In fact, I invite it because maybe that'll make me a better person.
Yeah.
But my goodness, could we have some common decency, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the bigger thing here. It's like, I too will be voting for Biden and Harris. And, while I have always voted Democrat in my, years of being able to vote, it's not about Democrats versus Republican. It's really something different. And what this man represents is just so ugly and so beyond political lines and so toxic for our country. And it's like, I've always kind of stayed out of politics, or at least not been publicly vocal about my political views. And this is the first time that I'm like, no, this is different. Like I can't accept it. I think when people say things like, oh, well, we're allowed to have opposing views, like and it's like, this is different. This is not about me being a Democrat and you being a Republican, or me being a liberal and you being conservative. This is about supporting a man who actively promotes hate and separation. And it's so vile for our country. It's just like, this is a different case.
Yeah.
Just like he has been the most quote unquote different president, this is a different time and a different situation. And it's so beyond political lines. And so, yes, I hope, I pray and hope that today goes our way. But I also hope that if it does, that the transition isn't as chaotic and difficult as it might be, because we are not dealing with a normal candidate here.
Yeah, it's just so frustrating. It's so frustrating. But yeah, I absolutely feel you, because I also have never been political, and up until Obama, I didn't even vote. I was one of the non-voters. And I admit, I don't even understand the whole system now. And I do my best to use my rights. But like it's always frustrating and hard to do the research, because I don't want to cast a vote for something that I'm not informed about.
Right.
And it's so challenging to keep up with stupid, inane celebrity news, let alone this proposition or this like whatever.
Yeah.
And all the marketing and political language that goes into like, oh, well, your land values. Yeah.
And the deception, the way they make you think it goes for one thing, but it actually goes for something else. Like the props are very confusing and very deceptive. You really do have to do your homework with that stuff.
Thankfully, like I've started to just sort of really lean on my friends who love politics and who just, right? Because I'm like, look, if they love it and I trust their judgment and they're like me, like it's not like, here, vote for me, but it's just like, if I need their take on something, I can count on them.
Yeah.
Because I realize like no one person can do it all. And I need to stop feeling bad that I hate politics. I just need to do my best to lean on the people who I trust to help me.
Yeah.
I mean, like they don't do graphic design either, so I help spruce up their dating profiles. Like
right. Hey, we all have our strengths and weaknesses, but I do remember like at the beginning of all this, like in 2016, being like, I'm like, not only am I so like disappointed and annoyed, but it's like, now I have to get involved in politics. Now I got to learn about politics. Like, I hate politics, and now I have to learn about all this shit and vote at every election. Because, so I think it is the one silver lining. I think people have become more interested in what's going on a local level, which is where it all begins. And they're becoming more educated on how our government actually works. I think this president has really awakened me to the fact that, like, you know, it's so hard to get anything done. And it's just like, you have to have the Senate and the House on your side. It's just like, ugh. Part of me is like, what are we doing? What are we doing here?
I think it's too binary, for one. Like, and this is just my sort of like armchair philosophy as like a non-binary trans person. Like, I resented, and I've loved Kamala Harris since I first met her, like way back. I did some gig, and it was like a thing for her, like before she was even like a big deal. I met her once, and I liked her, and I just decided I liked her. And so maybe I'm a shit political person because I didn't actually find out what she was about. I just decided to like her.
But I actually think what people take for granted, I have this argument with my husband all the time, is that most of this country votes that way. They vote on who they like. They vote on who they feel comfortable with. They don't research policy. They don't research their past. They just vote with who visually and personality-wise they feel good with and they feel comfortable with, which is, you know, how we got here in the first place. Trump appealed to a large population that thought he was awesome, and this is where we're at. But I think, you know, I think that's why Obama had such, you know, enthusiasm behind him. Not only him being black, but him being, you know, handsome, and him being charismatic, and him being a great speaker, and him. It's like, it's all that. It's the full package. And then people are like, yes, we can. You know what I mean? And it's like
casting a president, right? Like,
totally.
I would like to just go on record and say I have grown, and I no longer vote superficially.
Ugh. Oh God, I hate politics. Happy election day.
Happy election day.
Everyone listening, if you haven't done so already, please go out and vote. Vote. Hopefully you voted already, actually, but if not, go do it now.
And in California, I'm mail-in voting. I always mail-in vote, though.
I like doing it in person. I'll probably do early in person or ballot drop-off.
Yeah.
I don't trust the mail.
Right? Well, you kind of gotta do it early, because otherwise you're there forever.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Nikki. Thanks so much for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Until next time, know that you are more than enough. Check the show notes for links and info about today's guest. Follow us on Instagram at NotBlankEnoughPod. This episode was produced during the COVID-19 pandemic of 2020 and recorded remotely. Our show is executive produced by Grasie Mercedes and Dave Hill, and produced by Douglas Sarine and Colleen Beasley. Not Blank Enough is a Gumption Pictures production.